Well, this device right here is one that we've used to contact the people in the flying saucers. It receives the messages on a beam of light, and it is in turn translated by this unit and brought out as intelligible voice speech.
You mean to say you've actually received messages from
That's
people
right.
in flying saucers?
That's right.
American scientists are trying to make music, quavers and semi-quavers, to connect with the extraterrestrial intelligence that's landing in a sacred area, that being in Wyoming. But essentially, that sacred area was in this area with the late George Van Tassel, whom I personally knew. Who was George Van Tassel? He was an engineer at Hughes Aircraft, and Howard Hughes, the most famous American aviator scientist in the 40s, secured an old airport not too far away from here. And George took charge of this in the 1950s. In the mid-1950s, during his sleep, he was awakened by a strange phenomena of an extraterrestrial teacher who was speaking to him telepathically. He went outside.
Yeah, it was right outside his place he was sleeping, which was Giant Rock. He actually slept under Giant Rock, and just outside, for some reason he woke up. There was a vehicle there, and this entity called Tolganga. He doesn't know what happened to him after that, but after that he's always been in touch. That's part of what we're talking about in Alan's book, the consciousness linkage.
So George allowed me to teach under Giant Rock. I'm one of the few allowed to teach from the Dead Sea Scrolls and from the Greek Nag Hammadi text called the Gospel of Truth. And when I was teaching this, the door opened at the top of the staircase that went down into the room underneath Giant Rock, and a blue being appeared. And we all knew that this was a sacred place of visitation, used originally by the indigenous people here, really centuries before the arrival of Hughes aircraft people and naval intelligence. But they had a scout tower in the back, watching everything that George Van Tassel was doing in the creation of the Integratron, which was to create a biogeneration field out of harmonics, to heal the body, to prepare the body for contact with the higher worlds. And so again, having had the experience also being taken off the planet and brought back, working with 3 advisors to the late President Kennedy, and coming out here with George Van Tassel and having a spherical light follow me around the desert, I can assure you that this church is at the right location.
And we're really here, of course, to promote Alan's new book, which we've written a chapter in it.
And we're all here to promote there's a new consciousness coming to the planet. And this temple is part of that awakening of the deeper essence of the human being. And that's what these beings are coming here for. That's why they're making contact, as they say, because we are ready to wake up to this other reality. We've done enough practices, and I want to say yoga, there's always more yoga you can do, but we've done enough of that, and it's ready that our consciousness opens up and meets the other on a new plane, a new story. We're tired of wars and famines and atrocities and all the awful things, and I think a new reality is possible.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for inviting us to write chapter 3 of your book.
That's right.
Desiree and I are social scientists. We used to teach at the university in Irvine, but also all throughout the world we've worked as professional musicians, educators, scientists, and also those who work behind the scenes with several of the astronauts who in outer space saw huge spaceships, longer than 50 miles.
Yeah.
In such vast proportion that the astronauts knew that this was from a different world. And so your book is bringing all the important themes together.
Yeah, the book is a collection of many different writings. It's not just my writing. The Hurtaks have a writing. Do you know the UFO phenomenon? Linda Moulton Howe, have you heard of her? Whitley Strieber, he's written a chapter in here. John Mack, you know John Mack was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard and started to talk to people having experiences, and Harvard wanted to get rid of them because it said, you can't talk about people meeting little aliens. We got to get rid of you. But it was freedom of speech. You could say whatever you want. So we're also at the verge of a new time. If you watch the news, have you seen the reports on CNN about this 180-day report that was signed in December of the COVID relief bill, saying that intelligence agencies have to come forward this month, June 25th, and report what they know about UFOs or UAPs or whatever they're calling these things now, and they have to come forward and tell the truth. But, you know, this is not a new thing, and it's this book that I just want to read from that. In 1950, Harry Truman, president at the time, said, I can assure you that flying saucers, that's what they were called, then were called UFOs, now they're called UAPs, which means unexplained aerial phenomena, because they're more than just objects. But Truman says, given the fact that they exist, they are not constructed by any power on Earth. That was in 1950, and now, what is this now, 70
years later.
70 years later, they're finally coming out with the truth. So we are at the threshold of a new time, and that's why I thought this book would be a way to prepare people. But Dr. Hurtak and Desiree Hurtak have been doing this work for years. This is something that's a reality to them, and JJ here was at the first UFO conference, and tell them about what you saw in Brazil, too.
First UFO or extraterrestrial conference took place in Washington, D.C. in May of 1995. And at that conference were journalists from all over the world, including John Mack from Harvard University and myself. And we actually showed documentation of the extraterrestrial specimens. In fact, if you can get a film clip of the original proceedings of the first governmental disclosure in Washington, D.C., which honored Dr. Scott Jones, Dr. Hynek, and others who were celebrated investigators at that time, you will see that I put an actual reconstructed body of an extraterrestrial being at a table so that the audience could actually see the physical features of what we've known about for many, many years. And this being that I constructed was one of the intelligence officers that was brought to Los Alamos, New Mexico, to collaborate with Dr. Edgar Teller, father of the H-bomb.
Right.
So as shocking as this may seem, this knowledge has been known for many decades. And I've been involved for 48 years. In fact, I was one of the first to bring back actual metal from one of the spaceships in Brazil that had crashed years ago. This is a picture from a Brazilian newspaper. NASA investigators are looking at the ovnis or UFOs in São José dos Campos. And here I'm pictured with Dr. Edgardo Garrick, and you can see in the sky a V-shaped pattern of spherical objects that look like plates or saucers. But each one of them represents a football field in length and scope. And so you see here a whole flotilla of spaceships that even Gordon Cooper, who we worked with, later Desiree and I wrote a book with his help, said did fly over Berlin in 1951 when he was a test pilot.
Right, so that was one of the first experiences that he had. In 1951, he was flying over the border of East and West Germany, and he said that the Russian MiGs were flying next to him, and they both looked up. In 51, I mean, he knew what the technology was at that time. He was with the Air Force, and when they looked up, they saw a flotilla of vehicles, and he reported that when he came back.
So where did they come from? And what did they do with Gordon Cooper? Did they put him away with a straitjacket?
Now, they made him an astronaut. So that means to everyone who really listens to that they knew that perhaps, and had happened to many of the astronauts, he was one of the first 7, but there were others before him. And even though Buzz Aldrin, when he and his colleague were the first to go to the moon,
Ed Mitchell,
and a little before.
And before that, Armstrong
And Aldrin, they actually saw lights going all the way with them to the moon, and then when they landed, lights were around the moon. And a friend of ours worked at JPL in the press department, and he was able to privately pull one of those pictures of lights around when they
So
were...
this has been suppressed for 75 years since Roswell. We've been lied to, kept in the dark, and something is about to crack. Hopefully this month we're about to hear the truth. What do you think we're going to hear, Desiree?
Well, unfortunately not enough. I mean, it can go back, it actually goes back, strangely enough, to the German space program during World War II, when Maria Reichert actually was the name, right? She actually was giving information, and she was telling the top scientists of Germany how to build a UFO. And they built things called the Haunebu and the Vril. These are the Vril, in a certain sense, was the communication they were part of. And they really did have these saucer-shaped craft during World War II. And of course, then when we started, sadly, putting off in New Mexico, the H-bomb, vehicles were seen around that time as well. And that's where Roswell was one experience. Also, supposedly, radar we had developed.
And one of my colleagues who worked with President Kennedy was there at the site, and he said when they were testing these V2 rocket ships, one vehicle came down, an extraterrestrial vehicle, that is, and steered the rockets in a different direction, and the rocket blew up in the cemetery of Juarez, Mexico, as if to say, if we began to put weapon systems on the German rockets and send them into space, we're going to go into a space age the wrong way. Put weapons and military systems in space that would eventually destroy the biosphere of Mother Earth.
So this seems to be what they're very concerned about. Even Robert Salo was military, and he was stationed in one of the northern states at the nuclear missile silos, and he got a call. He was down under, and he got a call from above saying, hey, there's lights in the sky, they look like UFOs, what are we to do? And the guy goes, well, keep them out. Well, you can't keep them out because they were flying over. So when they flew over, they neutralized the nuclear weapons in the silos, and these are, you know, deep into the ground. They've done this also in Bent Waters, which was a U.S. UK or Great Britain base that was supposedly hiding secret nuclear weapons. So they definitely don't want us doing that kind of stuff.
So we're here tonight because of you and these children, these beautiful children. They represent the future of humanity. We do not want atomic war systems. We do not want situations of, we will call them massive weapon systems, space platforms that could destroy the future of all humanity.
So I just want to say, Alan asked the question, what do we expect? June 24th is technically the deadline, so just some days away. What do we expect them to say? Not much. They're probably going to go back to an event off of San Diego called the Nimitz experience. How many people know about the Nimitz? Okay, just a few of you. This is where what they call Tic Tacs, they look like the Tic Tac candies, we're seen flying around. 2 F-18s. We're monitoring them. It was actually a 3-day event, but one particular event. They'll probably start, that all the UFO stuff started in 2004, and they won't go back to all the cover-up in the previous century.
So how many people have seen a UFO? You know, we're in Joshua Tree. Like, that's good, Bob. That's great. So we know that it's real. I mean, Joshua Tree is a hot spot. Giant rock, we all know. That was a landing place, and George Van Tassel had contact there and built it because these ETs told him to build it. And of course, he never had a chance to actually finish it because he mysteriously died because he knew the government, I think, knew it was valuable. But this is a major vortex for this kind of activity. So I think the people who live here are actually more open, more available to that kind of knowledge. And so the book goes into levels and levels of download that are happening from different ET races and different what the Hurtak called ultra celestials or ultra
terrestrial.
Ultra.
The book called The Keys of Enoch In 1973, I wrote this book after my contact experience, my spiritual contact experience.
This was not just an ordinary contact experience. He was actually taken off the planet with his body.
We actually call it a Merkaba experience and that's just with the other realities, the other intelligences that don't need a flying saucer to travel.
And here's a picture taken some 20 years ago in Mexico, in Tulum, with light around my body when I was using the sacred names of God. In the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Sanskrit. Light appeared around my body. A man was taking a picture of his wife. You see her at the bottom of the picture. Was able to capture in a few seconds the light field, the phenomena that was around my body. So this has continued with me to this day. This is why I work with several of the astronauts, particularly Gordon Cooper, who in his book called Leap of Faith gives the details. Uncomfortable as it may for some of the politicians to know, Gordon was a deeply spiritual astronaut who said the first prayers in outer space. Mm-hmm. And he, like myself, had the experience of recognizing that beyond the extraterrestrial, there was the extracelestial intelligence. We would call them the cosmic master teachers who would be coming back. And so all of you in this house of worship and places of worship throughout the world, in many ways, have a deeper sense of sympathy, empathy, and love for humanity. It's the higher love of the divine spark within each of us that will make us all take this leap of faith into recognizing that this is a countdown. Whether Washington tells us the complete story or not, we are, according to most other countries of the world, in the cosmic disclosure phase.
But we're here really to talk about Alan's book, and Alan's book is amazing because it really covers everything from hardware to software, what we call lightware. So Alan, a little bit more.
Wait, before we do that, I just want JJ to read this part where Gordon Cooper says why we're so trapped in the lies and the dogma and what we can do about it. And then I'll talk about the
I'm reading from astronaut Gordon Cooper, American hero and patriot, a man of deep faith, and he writes this: "But as I see it, our government is now trapped in a big box of old lies. It's going to take a lot of courage on the part of some future administration to say, quote, 'Folks, our government has been lying to you all these years. Now we're going to come clean and tell you the real truth,' end of quote. As I said, that's going to take courage, something there doesn't seem to be much of or a surplus of in Washington these days."
So we can't wait for the government to tell us what's real. There's no official sanction of reality. Reality is shifting to be each person's own experience. If you told me you've seen something, I can't argue with your experience, but what we need to do is come forward and support each other in our unique visions, our own experiences. No matter what that reality is, we are here to acknowledge each other's truth. And this is going to make not just the ETs, UFOs, but our spiritual experiences more valid, our interpersonal experiences. There's validation in the subjective reality, which is the quantum revolution. Actually, before quantum, Einstein said it's all relative to where you are. Light travels relative to the observer. And we are then creators of this reality. And the more we get the personality and the dogma and the conditioning out of the way, the more we open up to these vaster experiences that are just knocking on our door. We have to trust these downloads, these intuitions, these telepathies that we're all so much more connected to than psychology has told us. I mean, psychology is great, it's done a great job, but it's also made us doubt our own mind. And
too much self-analysis is self-paralysis. So you have politicians saying this and this, doublespeak, and no one really speaks about the smoking gun. Well, chapter 3 of this book, which Desiree and I wrote, is the smoking body.
Is it?
And what is the smoking body? It was the actual pictures of the extraterrestrials themselves.
I know someone's smoking something there.
And so I have the opportunity with several of my colleagues and my wife to have produced pictures of some of the alien specimens or alien groups.
Did you see this? Did you actually see someone who looked?
This is a blue-gray humanoid form that has a special energy coming out of the eyes that was seen in South America by several of my colleagues whom I talked to, and also an experience in San Jose, California, a case that I investigated.
So what's really interesting, and one of the reasons we believe, there's many reasons why the government hasn't come clean, but one of the reasons is clearly the fact that it's not a simple experiment. That's why they even changed it from UFO, identified flying object, to, Alan?
UAP, unexplained aerial phenomena. This is a phenomenon. It's not an object in the sky. There's all sorts of cognitive distortions of time, space that happens when you see one of these things. There's a telepathic communication. There's an entanglement of consciousness. When people see these things, and if you've ever seen it, you're somehow different, or at least I was. I mean, something changes because you're making contact with a different level of awareness.
And not only one group or one race or one species, but there's more than 82. So you can imagine the problem of the government not wanting to admit that there are even categories beyond the physical that go into the transphysical or the spiritual.
Well, that seems phenomenal to even contemplate. How could there be so many different races? Well, life is an emergent property of creation. Life is not a freak happenstance of nature, as Darwinian, Newtonian, mechanistic thinking tells us. It's everywhere. It grows between the sidewalks. It's out there. Intelligent life inhabits the universe, and we're just a small little piece of that with the ego-centered ideas that we're all alone, we're the only thing. So that's part of the problem. We're not the smartest guys on the block.
This is why your book is so important that you quote the great German poet, Annemarie Rilke,
right,
in his realization of the great wonderment that comes with the many worlds.
Right, we have to develop wonder. So people used to say, do you believe in UFOs? That is not the right question. This is not about belief.
It's a reality.
And investigations. We're here to have a public conversation, or to plant the seeds about public conversation about what everyone knows. We cannot leave it up to the government to tell us the nature of reality, because they don't know. They do not know what's going on. They don't have the answers. That's part of the reason they haven't told us anything, because they don't like to say, well, we just don't know. And then we would say, what are we spending $10 billion on military for if you don't know what you're even supposedly protecting ourselves against? And they say in the New York Times, well, they've been invading our airspace, and they're coming and going, and they're not Russians, they're not Chinese, they're not ours, but we don't know what they are, we don't know what to do about it. So maybe we need to put money into academia and scientists that are open, not Neil deGrasse Tyson, nice guy.
Or have a public education program.
But you talk to someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he says, oh, those videos are just defects in the cameras, and they weren't seeing anything, because even mainstream scientists are so attached to their worldview. What we're doing, all of us here, Kim and Spencer, everybody, you guys right there in the front row, you're expanding your worldview. Do you know that? Just say yes. That's okay. No, we're all expanding what's possible. We really are.
Particularly now through the internet.
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to be doing with other programs, with the music, with the anthropology, with the historic facts that we're putting together from the American Southwest.
So let's talk about anthropology. I mean, scientists have now told us that we're not the only species that walked and probably even talked on this planet. We had Neanderthals, everyone's heard of that, and they found amazing caves in France that actually are very logically placed in artistic drawings. We've had another group, which is mostly from the Russian area, called Denisovans. And the Neanderthals and the Denisovans actually got it together, they were together. And we also, in some cases now with this Ancestry.com and 23andMe, see Neanderthal genes in our own DNA. Then there was another group called kids would call the hobbits, that were called Homo florensis. They were small little beings that lived on islands closer to Indonesia. So those are just three of the many.
They're not even the most intelligent creatures on the earth. The most intelligent creatures are the cetaceans, the whales, and the dolphins. They never sleep. They breathe on one side of their brain, the other, and when they want to sleep, they sleep on one side. And they speak 4 sounds at once. We can only say one sound at a time. They can say sounds with their blowholes, their nostrils, their throat. So,
and one of our friends in South America invented a pacemaker listening to the sounds of the whale's heart.
But their also brains are much more complex. If you look at a dolphin's brain and a whale and a human's brain, you can see so many more folds, so much more advanced activity. So we have yet to even meet and talk to the so-called aliens on our planet.
Right, but let's talk about aliens that are off the planet and that people have seen. So I think the most common probably are the Greys. These are also smaller types of beings. They seem to be cloned, wouldn't you say, Alan?
Well, you don't know. We don't know. Are they cloned?
Yeah, some people
It's
say
in the
cloned.
book, chapter 3.
And it seems that...
I must have missed that. No.
And
I gave a news release in Mexico City 42 years ago. And at that news release, I was fortunate to be a young scientist, and Dr. Heineck and I had some pictures given to us by those much higher in investigative powers. And I showed one of the pictures of the ET specimens. Right. Of course, you know this has been out and about on the internet for many years. We showed this in Europe to Russian, German, and French scientists. I mean, it's been the subject of Steven Spielberg's films.
Close Encounters, that was Heineck who gave us that.
The idea was at the end of the film, what did they do? Did they take supercomputers? No, they went into a musical discourse with the spaceship.
For communication.
Because they were attracted to the sounds of the inner mind, what the dolphin sounds were. What the dolphins and the whales are telling us, our planet is dying. There will be no future for our children unless we change our vibration.
Well, let's go on. So the Greys are one, and there's been quite a few reports and confirmations. They have those big black eyes, and they do have big eyes, and they're probably darker than ours. They don't have as much white in them. But supposedly one of those front parts of their eyes is a lens, like you can pull it off, like you can pull off a big contact lens. And they use it because if they go into different light environments, it actually adjusts their seeing to those lights. So it's a pretty sophisticated reality. And there's other beings that we
There's the reptilians, there's the tall whites, which are luminous beings. But each of these beings, in my experience, I've met them in dream time, not when they show up, your consciousness shifts because they actually vibrate, according to my experience, at a different rate. So their conscious field is so differently calibrated to the human consciousness field. And you can see that even sometimes if you meet like a high master, their field is just different. Or crazy people. If you're around the crazy people, you start to think these sort of crazy thought because the field is emanating from the consciousness. But when you meet these beings, they're so different. They're such a different caliber of thought that it distorts our field. You have to be very lucid. You have to practice lucidity, which means being aware in altered states as much as you can in your dream states. And then you can meet them more on an even playing field despite the distortion in our field that we get affected by. So that's been my experience.
So what Alan's saying also is a popular movement now in the understanding of consciousness by Stuart Hameroff from the University of Arizona and others and Lynn McTaggart, if you haven't read her book, it's called The Field, is that consciousness is a field that goes all around this globe, but also is going into, we'll say, a universal media as well. And that we are kind of more senders and receivers of information. So if we put out negative thoughts, like we're thinking, oh, we're unhappy, we don't like the guy we're dating, we're poor, this, that, and the other, then we're constantly picking up those energies in connection to the field. if we are working with positive thoughts and positive energy, we're actually able to receive opportunities from that field. So that's really what the consciousness field is all about. But in that consciousness field is not just you and me, people in this room, it's everything and everyone, including other species of intelligence.
So the consciousness field affects us all. That's why we want the government to come forward and say, yes, they exist, because it gives a kind of peace to this conscious exploration that we're all a part of. So we all exist here in a consciousness field, and when these ETs come into our space, it changes that. And we're about to go through a major shift in the consciousness field.
Right. One of Alan and our favorite films that we have is Linda Moulton Howe, when she was discussing a contact that she knew about that took place between a young military officer, really strong, big guy, and he was ordered by the military to communicate with an alien intelligence that the military was coordinating with. And we do feel the military does coordinate with certain alien species. And they ordered the alien to actually step on the ground because they tend to like to levitate and float.
It's disturbing when you're talking to someone who's levitating.
And they told the guy to try to hold on to his consciousness, to be conscious aware.
Look into the eyes of this alien. He said was told to look into the eyes.
And he thought, oh, nothing of it, you know. What's this? And this little guy came towards him. He was only 3 or 4 feet tall. And what he gave him was 7 levels of information. It was like watching
movies, he said there were 7 movies going through his mind that weren't just visual. He could touch and taste and smell the information going through his mind, overlaid with these golden symbols, at least 7 of them, and he could not comprehend the intake of information, and he collapsed.
Even Jesus in the New Testament said the eye is the cipher or the register of the soul. But through the eye you can see not only the human personality, but you can see the energy field and the other realities.
Yeah, but they were too much for this guy. There was too much information. So we have to practice that level of intake. Just take it all in, because that's what we're going to be facing in the new
And that
world.
is why we discovered that one of the ways that this military officer did not have, that could have helped him, was spiritual music.
Well, yes.
To activate the body, mind, and spirit together. This does work because I used it. And I was taken off this planet.
How did you do that?
By the deep breathing, by the sounds that I was able to emanate, my mind was put into a positive state of not being afraid. The energy field around my body allowed the heart vibratory field to match that of my mind. So there was a biofeedback where my body, my cells, my circulatory systems were all in balance from head to heel. All 7 chakras were aligned. And finally, the intelligence that manifested was able to return the musical signal. Just like Alan Hynek and others were portraying in that movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But this was done with, obviously, electronic music.
So it's all about changing our vibratory field.
Because we're all vibrations. Light is a vibratory collection of vibrations. It can be negative. You can choose to watch American television and be negative for the rest of your life because there's always some problem. Or you can choose to watch your own internal television, which is to see, as you see in most wonderful places of worship, wonderful art, wonderful sound, people of all ages coming together to celebrate life.
Harmony, peace. This is what we find here in this beautiful building. Kind of sense of just dropping in. Because it holds a vibration, Kim. You've created a container that allows the higher experiences to start to open up our minds, and we can start to download.
So when I was taken off the planet, the United States was to be one of the major areas of contact. Why? Because it represented historically the place where all people could come together and celebrate freedom. And even there can be found aspects in all cultures of light. The majority of the initial focus would be here. This is why all countries are looking to the United States, because we were the first in outer space. We were the first to share the breakthroughs of what the astronauts saw in outer space, Gordon Cooper being one example.
So let's
and we're here with you and others like you as a journalist to bring, as it were, a larger overview. We will call, in astronaut Mitchell's terminology, the overview effect, which is what? The overview effect.
It's an effect of seeing the whole world as one planet, oneness. That's where we're going. So let's talk about what the future holds in the positive sense of what we have to look forward to.
Well, I'd like to just say a little bit more about alien technology, people, that, you know, there's also those that look like us. And I think that's more odd than a lot of other strange-looking beings, insectoids, praying mantis types, even the ones with the elongated heads, which actually are very similar to us. The idea being that we also come from other realities. We're not limited to this planet. Our DNA is out in space. NASA's already discovered that 2 of the nucleobases that make up our DNA are found out in space. It's really just a matter of rearranging the molecules in the right direction to create forms of life like we are.
Right, so they're everywhere. Life is everywhere. Let's just face it. Why is that a big deal for the government to tell us, like, guess what? We're not alone. There's life everywhere. It seems so simple. They're treating us like children.
But you understand the roadmap is on many levels and in many races. So who's to say one group is better than another? You need a social psychology. In my logic, you need a spiritual overview so you can put this in a harmonic.
But I do think corporations are controlling the politics and the media, and that's our problem.
Right, so Alan asked, what's the future? Well, if you go back to the work of Colonel Philip Corso, who supposedly back in the 50s and 60s had access to back engineering the technology of both crashed and what we believe is gifted to us, to the American government, and probably to other governments as well, extraterrestrial craft. And so what they did was they actually, instead of the military developing the technology, it was Colonel Corso's, we'll say, challenge to be able to get this to certain corporations. And supposedly he did everything from night viewing goggles, where originally we had these gigantic things, to making them much more small and even affordable to us today.
Well, the microchip itself was supposedly reverse engineered, which has changed technology. So we're living off the benefit of alien technology, but the government still doesn't want to give us the free energy. This is what's going to change our future. This is what's going to cultivate the deserts. This is going to feed whole populations that don't have enough food. If we can just get the energy we need, which is abundant, obviously, everywhere. The universe runs on free energy. The sun's not charging us for its sunlight, even though someone's making money off of that. But it's the corporations that don't want to acknowledge the fact that, these ships are not filling up their gas tank to get here. They're here with a different type of advanced physics and advanced technology.
Several years ago, Time magazine had a special article on Roger Desiree, a well-known ecologist from Africa, actually originally from Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, but his father, Alan Desiree, were able to find out how you can renew desert areas by putting proper vegetation and allowing the animals to roam and to pack it down in certain patterns whereby the organisms communicate and build this underground and surface web structure that supports life. And they felt that the whole desert area of Australia and the American Southwest could be turned into fantastic fields.
Why not?
The positive extraterrestrials have this breakthrough technology for us to implement ecological centers. And we're doing several experiments now in South America and Australia to show the food and production principle that is very close. So what I'm saying to you, there is an answer, but also a psychology of wanting to do something for the sake of humanity.
I know, but they're not giving us this because we haven't had our act together.
Perhaps it was there in some parts of the world, but was suppressed by those who wanted to play the money game.
We're still making war. We're still creating nuclear weapons. We have to really be worthy, I feel, all of us, to stop making war with each other.
You can say this about all of the superpowers, from Russia to China.
Everything. That's why they're not going to help us out of the mess we created.
And that is why we need to have a citizens' movement.
This is up to us.
We need a public comment using the internet. A friend of mine years ago by the name of Gene Youngblood, wrote this fantastic book called Expanded Cinema. He said with the video camera system, you can open up education for young people. They don't have to rely upon the big TV stations. And so what we need is to expand our consciousness to see the values of what George Van Tassel was doing here in Joshua Tree 4 decades ago. We need to have an expanded reading program to understand what our friend Gordy Cooper was telling us when he was an astronaut coming back from outer space. He said that there are already large city structures out there in space. And I released in my book, Deeds of Enoch, published in 1973 pictures of the pyramids on Mars. So how is it that people on Mars, thousands of years ago before Egypt, had these large pyramid cities?
Desiree, what do you think?
Yeah, so as much as we would like the government to release all this information by June 24th, chances are it's going to be left up to the people, to the citizens everywhere around the world who are more and more making contact. And I think that's what's really important.
But I do think the government might say, if you listen to Luis Elizondo, he's been the front guy from the Pentagon. Have you heard of him? Luis Elizondo, he's been in some of the news. And he's the guy that went from the Pentagon who was investigating this under a secret program developed by Harry Reid. Senator Harry Reid gave $22 million for this, what they call black budget program, to look at the UFO situation. He was just a regular guy. He starts to look through the videos and the papers and says, oh my God, this is real, this is true. How come we don't know about it? And he left the Pentagon, supposedly. I don't know if you ever can leave the Pentagon, but he left the Pentagon and he formed a citizens organization starting to push for this disclosure. And that's what was released in the New York Times in December of 2017. But he's been on the news everywhere, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, saying these ships that they see in the sky, and 60 Minutes, if you ever saw the 60 Minutes, he went on 60 Minutes, says, Bill Whitaker, I love that line. You know, Bill Whitaker, he's the guy in 60 Minutes, and he says, so, Mr. Elizondo, are these things real? Are UFOs real? And Elizondo looks at him and says, come on, Bill, we're already past that point. The government has admitted UFOs are real. They're real. And Elizondo says they're not from China, they're not from Russia, they're not ours. He will only say they're not from any country we know. He will not say the A word. He will not come out legitimately and acknowledge that these are off-world vehicles. He's come that close to practice, but he won't say, because once that's said, I think all bets are off. But he might as well have said it, because he says, well, he doesn't know who's making this advanced technology. So we're that close for the headlines and the Pentagon and the government saying, guess what? We have visitors.
Everything revolves around the declassified film from the Pentagon for the year 2004. And Desiree, what is the importance of 2004?
Oh yeah, the Keys of Enoch actually say that that's the next breaking point in the past, of course, 2004, for us on a gut level to start waking up. And of course, not much was said at 2004, but now that really may be the new starting off point. Because in addition to the 2004 Nimitz, that's USS Nimitz experience out in San Diego, there was in 2014 and 2015 in the Atlantic area, everywhere from, we'll say, Virginia down to the Carolinas, other sightings from the Navy. And the Navy actually is the one really coming forward. The Air Force did not come forward with all the data. And then again, 2019, back on the West Coast by San Diego, another sighting. So there seems to be more and more.
Well, they have so much footage of these craft. Of course, people say they're all been followed by F-16s, and you know they're getting videos. But even though the government's not going back before 2004, this book traces the history of the phenomena from Roswell onward from many different perspectives. So it's not just my opinion or the Hurtaks. There's 10 other people writing essays about their in-depth research, their 40, 50 years of experience, like Linda Moulton Howe. She talks about whistleblowers coming forward and telling her in confidence that there have been 3 competing extraterrestrial races fighting for control over this planet. That's what she was told. We also get an essay by John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist who died a few years ago, but there was archives and there was an audio tape that was transcribed in this is the first book that has that essay, that writing in print. And he says that there's subtle realms to this phenomena. We're not even sure we can call these things aliens. They may be things that we don't have a name for, and we just call them aliens. But what we're really interfacing with, subconsciously, superconsciously, these crafts in the sky, may be a whole other phenomena that we can't even name.
So we must make contact first with our inside.
Right, exactly, Jacob.
And this is why you can only put so much on the table.
Right.
And this is why we need music and vibration. And again, I'm saying this to all of you in the audience, to Trish and to others. We're not here to give you a science discourse.
No.
We're here to give you an experience of meditation and music. Why? Because this is what the children of the world have experienced in places. When John Mack visited South Africa, Zimbabwe, he visited the children. That he didn't say this piece of space metal or this telescope. No, he was interested in why the children were able to see things the adults could not see.
These children had the craft land in their yards, and these beams came off and telepathically.
Just like the Hopi children here in northern New Mexico and Arizona.
With these children to tell them to save the earth, protect the earth. These are the messages these Zimbabwe children were given.
Right, the teachers were all in their own teachers' meeting inside. They let the kids go outside to play. And this vehicle came down. Small spheres were also seen. That's what's interesting. It's not always just one UFO. Small spheres, a being or two got out and had face-to-face contact with these kids that were there. Now they've kind of grown up and...
There's a movie out called The Ariel School. That was the name of the school in Zimbabwe, and now these kids are grown up. And that event has affected their whole life, 50 children from Zimbabwe. So this event is going to affect all our lives as we come forward. And we start to share with each other whatever experiences you've had. People have kept in the closet, really, because this has been ridiculed in our culture to talk about these deep personal experiences, but now it's time to come out. If JJ can write a book in 1973 about this phenomena that took him off and become world famous, this book has been published in how many languages?
30 languages.
Around the world. How many editions have you sold?
Over 100,000 books in just one language.
Really? I want my book to sell 100,000.
I know. I just want to say one of the things we do mention in there, and it seems to be coming forward more and more, is there's extraterrestrial levels of intelligence. They seem to be able to work with at least the fifth dimension, and I'm talking about real dimensions because they're able to take you, or they themselves come through walls, are able to work beyond the third dimension. And then we consider there's extra celestial beings. Mark Sims, if you've heard of him, he talks about the celestial contact he had. That was the word, actually, he was given. We didn't even know that when we gave that book to Alan. But anyway, there's extra celestials. These are ones that have evolved a bit more beyond the physical need for spaceships. And then the ultra-terrestrials, we classify them with the angelics, with the lords of light, with the divine energies. And all these beings really put energy into that consciousness field. And ultimately, if we tune in to these higher levels of intelligence, they're, as Alan said earlier, they're really just waiting for us to knock at the door.
And harmonic convergence means the conversion of sound and positive thinking. So as we shift our conversation now to what I would call the spiritual musical side, we realize this is the upper part of our body system. Our body system generally is weighed down by traditional logic and information. It's only on one side of the brain, either the right or the left, but put the two together and you open up the door to think in technicolor, to experience the light and the sounds not only of the dolphins and birds, but also of the higher levels of cosmic intelligence. And this is why we have the importance of meditation here, because it's not what we would, should we say, consider sufficient information just to put things into books. We have to put things into the book that is yet to be written, which is the book of life, that comes out of every breath, every sound of our body that we compose.
Yes.
And so this auditorium is a perfect place to demonstrate what I will call the sounds of the reactivation of spirit, mind, and heart.
Why don't you do some sounds?
When I'm going to do this, but let me say this first. This is really what I consider the opening of the seventh seal, which is the higher mind that's usually hidden because people are afraid really to express the miracle power of the human consciousness. That we have the ability to reconstruct the science and the psychology behind the ancient traditions, to speak to the animals, to speak to the elements, and to speak to the Godhead. And that was why I had this experience in asking in prayer and experimenting with these sounds, that if I could open a morphogenic door to go beyond the physical 3 dimensions to the 5th, I'd be willing to go with what they showed me. And that's exactly why I wrote this book. Everything is here, 2004, when the Pentagon would release. Even the name of the new vice president is here in this book.
From 1973, he wrote
the names
that.
of the contact areas in this book, the names and places of the historic places, even finding what you called earlier the Homo floresiensis, this small hoplite intelligence in the Indonesian island of Flores, in this book.
So this is a multi-dimensional book. As you read through this, open up more and more
it's
cognitive
written on
awareness.
many levels that you have to have a language of music and color to understand that. So you bring all people into celebration.
Right.
The book is written in such a way that you cannot create a human religion to keep people only on one leg of their life. They have to see that they can dance with both legs.
No, this sound you're going to do is about making contact. So this is what we're ready to tune in. Ready to tune in and start making contact. This is our first step. JJ.
So let's close our eyes. We could visualize this small green planet as a sphere before our eyes. And as we close our eyes and see momentarily the small green blue planet like a light that has its own focus of turning on and turning off, a type of blending of music, coloring the whole color spectrum before our eyes. If we can begin to think in technicolor and see beyond this blue-green planet, a landscape of all of the planets of our solar system, vibrating in color, and having a color sweep of the entire light spectrum. And then if we can take what astronaut Mitchell and astronaut Gordon Cooper said, a leap of faith, even going to a higher octave, beginning to hear the sounds in the universe, what the ancient Greeks called the music of the spheres. With Gustav Holst, the great European musicologist, his music called the music of the planets. We can begin to hear these sounds. First, somewhat chaotic, but then beautiful soundscapes. I'm going to use now, with Desiree also, a combination of the Hebrew and the Sanskrit, the two oldest traditions of cosmology that speak of the music of the spheres, the music of the divine worlds that we must ultimately merge with to see the reality behind the physical incarnation. We're going to say 3 times the Shanti, 3 times.
So we'll start with Om, and then we'll
basic vibration of life.
Then we'll do 3 Shantis, which of course means peace, and then we'll say another Om, so you end up saying 2 Oms together.
And when you say the 3 Shantis, think of the first at the base of your spine, your stomach area, the second in your heart, and the third in your higher mind, representing a triple power of unity. We are all Trinity beings of body, mind, and spirit. Then ultimately, when we say the Ein Sof, which is the intonation of the eternal light, that which is without limitation, we open up the 7th seal, we feel a light over our heads.
But let us just start with the Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om.
Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Feel your body.
Om,
Shanti, 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 Om. Om,
Shanti, 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 Om, Shanti, 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 Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
So you feel the flow from the base of your spine, slowly up the front and the back, up the spinal system, into the area we call the throat, and then into the area of our optical areas, and in between our two eyes, a third eye or spiritual eye, marked on Ash Wednesday with the ash that represents what is known in the Hindu tradition as the inner spiritual eye, in the Christian tradition, the understanding of the cosmic Christ. As we begin to visualize, though, this greater power of consciousness being augmented by vibrations, we add the Ein Sof. So we say, Om Shanti, 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 Ein Sof, which means now it goes into space. Higher space, cosmic space, space beyond the third dimension. Space where all cosmic civilizations enjoy with the human race.
And Ein Sof is really a Hebrew word, but Ein means no and Sof means thing. So it's also Eastern in its philosophy, no thing. There's no limits, there's no separation. And that's how it is in the consciousness connection. With other realms of intelligence, there's no consciousness separation.
The source of eternity, the beginning of all time space, that's where we're tapping into.
Again, with our eyes closed, we visualize not just a picture of space, but a picture of space filled with cosmic spheres of color. These are what is called cosmograms, to see the cosmic frontiers, not to see a black and white planet, but to see the energy aura of the planets. Not to see empty ether, but to see that there is vibratory meaning and resonant acoustical vibrations around space, coming into our personal subjective space, and then taking our thoughts back into the greater space. I'm going to sing in solo 3 times the extra mantra Ein Sof, and then please join us if you wish. Om Shanti 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 Ein Sof. Om Shanti 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 Ein Sof. Om Shanti 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 Ein Sof. All of us 12 times. Om Shanti 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 Ein Sof. 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 As we diminish the sound, again we begin to realize there is a mathematical pattern that attunes with the 12 vibratory axotonal lines within our body. These are the acupuncture fields that are used from head to toe to vibrate sound in healing through the human circulatory system. As we begin to see our body as a harp, we begin to use these tones and to stroke them carefully, no matter how imperfect our voice is. We begin to energize a field of vibration, a biophotonic field of energy that is most important to opening up the 5th dimension of mind over matter, going beyond the 5 senses, going into a higher energy field of refreshment, renewal, and regeneration.
So take that vibration into your body. Just let it hum through that whole mechanism, your cellular structure. We are increasing our vibratory field. Just breathe in for a second. Like that. And in. This is the shift we're in.
And you begin to see the glowing planets. Each has a special field that can take on the shape of a face. And so the planets become vocal, musical points. For some, actual angelic faces. For others, vibratory centers like musical notes. And you began to appreciate what the ancients in building temples and pyramids throughout the world were thinking of when they understood the music of the spheres, allowing us to see the progression, the vibration of F sharp, the vibration of Mother Earth up the musical scale of the 7 chakras, with the higher crown chakra, where all the planets together vibrating around our head would become like a crown of light, a crown of golden light, a biophotonic aura of sound and meaning. This is something that Linda Moulton Howell, the great journalist, speaks of in her writings, that we speak of in our writings. Many of you have heard, even with the indigenous people who met at Giant Rock, years before the American government built a landing post, a listening post. We began to reach out. We thank the Most High, the source of all sources, the light of all light, for this physical body, this incarnation, which is a musical incarnation also, of how in the micro-universe of our body, mind, and spirit, we have the triple power, the triple stops. The experience of what Dr. Hynek and others, Steven Spielberg, were conveying in this music, to reach out musically to our friends and let them know we can sing, we can vibrate, we can pray, we can chant, but most importantly, we can love with the vibration of cosmic attunement. This is the great drama. This is the great celebration that is before our doorstep.
And we know all life is vibration. And even the astronauts that traveled around the backside of the moon heard sound vibrations.
So this is the quickening, the time of ascension, the time of revelation, the time of a new heaven and a new earth as we come into these new forms that are not isolated from the rest of the cosmos, but are here as part of a greater ecology of the mind, of consciousness. We are coming into our day, into our time, into our beingness. We are part of all that is and all there ever was. And the planet and the humans are waking up to that fact.
And if we were to look at our body through an X-ray machine, we would see we're not a physical body, but a cloud of cosmic ions and electrons. We are an energy field in human form, waking up to the 5th dimension and its potential. And if we can school our energies more ecumenically or universally, perhaps we can see the vision of what John the Divine and other writers of antiquity wrote about when he said at the end of the cycle, it would be the gathering of the tribes, or the different divisions of humanity would sing the song of the Infinite One, the song of glory.
So when we go out at some point at the evening, look at the stars here in Joshua Tree, away from the lights of the city and stare into space, I just want to read the last sentence of this book, which is a quote from Albert Einstein, one of the thought revolutionaries who started to look at reality in a different way. And he said, as we look out at these stars, still there are moments when one feels free from one's own identification with human limitations and inadequacies, all our little dramas. He says, at such moments one imagines that one stands on some spot of a small planet, gazing in amazement at the cold yet profoundly moving beauty of the eternal, the unfathomable. Life and death flow into one, and there is neither evolution nor destiny, only being.
We count you among the great voices of the world that are opening up. East Europe, even in Russia, even in the underground parts of the Far East, we have voices singing the names of God.
Yes, thank you.
In the Synchronous, you go back to the original, you will see that the ancient scriptures are written by musicologists who had the mystical experiences of hearing. And so I'm going to bless you with a special sound that I was given when I was taken off the planet.
Great. I love that.
It's an ancient Hebrew, but it's a blessing of the work of Melchizedek. How many of you heard this word Melchizedek? Of course, you know it's the tradition, both in the Old New Testament, but also amongst the other peoples of the world, even to the contemporary churches, that there is a much higher level of priestly administration, and that works with something beyond genealogy, something beyond incarnation. It's a higher music that unites the planets, and so I'm going to give the blessing.
Yes.
So please receive this. Keep your eyes closed. In the name of Elion, the Most High God, in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, the Christ, that is the cosmic, in the name of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit that lives and dwells and liberates, may this triple power, may the voices upon the mountains and the deserts of the world where the angelic hierarchy has come, bless us, keep us, and radiate through our eyes and our heart the great love that must transpire if we are to receive the gifts of the kingdom at our doorstep. This is the time of the gathering, the gathering, and the gathering. And so let us come together with song and celebration, for each of us is one with the Good Shepherd. And when we are one with the Good Shepherd, and those of the order of Melchizedek, we are the Moshedim, the shepherds, stepping beyond dogma and borders and bringing brothers and sisters together in celebration of that which has no end and no beginning. It always was, present with the I am that I am. May we be lifted on high, and may we greet those from the higher realms that come to this sacred place of the American Southwest. Giant Rock is also the stepping stone to the angelic kingdom. The rock will be rolled away, and underneath Giant Rock will be found the evidence of a much earlier life. Bless us in joy and peace and prosperity. May the free world prevail against those who will take away the freedoms of song, of gathering, of celebration. As we say from the east and the west, the north and the south, the four great amens. Amen. 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 And amen.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
There is a term used often on the closing of the messages, which they tell us is a portion of a universal tongue that is spoken by space people.
And what's that particular word?
Adonai Vasu Barakis.
And what does it mean?
Literally translated, as they've told us, it means farewell, good brothers.